Why You Think Wrong and How It's Secretly Ruining Your Life. Published by MindForge Audiobooks. Introduction. Why do intelligent people make terrible decisions? Not once, not by accident, but repeatedly and almost predictably. They read, they learn, they believe they're thinking clearly, and yet they stay in the wrong careers, hold on to toxic relationships, and ignore warning signs until it's too late. So what's going wrong? It's not a lack of intelligence. It's not a lack of information. It's something far more unsettling. The realization that the mind you trust the most may be the very thing leading you astray. Because the truth is simple. You are not always thinking. Most of the time, you are reacting. Reacting to fear, past experiences, and invisible patterns you didn't choose. And the most dangerous part? It feels like control. You feel certain, logical, right. But that feeling is often an illusion, a story your brain creates to keep you comfortable, not correct. Think about a time when a decision felt absolutely right in the moment, only for you to look back later and wonder, what was I thinking? That question is where everything begins. Because in that moment, you realize something powerful. You weren't fully in control. Something faster than logic, stronger than reason, was guiding you. This audiobook exists for one purpose: to break that illusion, to show you how your mind quietly manipulates your choices and how you can take that control back. Because once you understand how your thinking actually works, you gain something rare: clarity. Not perfect thinking, but awareness. And awareness changes everything. Because the moment you stop blindly trusting your thoughts is the moment you start thinking for real. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Thinking. You believe you're thinking. You believe every decision you make is guided by logic, intention, and awareness. But most of the time, you're not thinking at all. You're reacting. Quickly, automatically, almost invisibly. And the most unsettling part is this: you don't even notice it happening. Because the mind is designed to feel like it's in control, even when it isn't. Think about your last small decision. Not something major, just something ordinary. Maybe you picked up your phone, opened social media, chose what to eat, responded to someone in a conversation. Did you carefully analyze that decision? Did you pause, weigh the options, consider the consequences? Or did it just happen? That's the illusion. What feels like thinking is often just a reaction that was already set in motion before you became aware of it. Your brain operates on two systems. One is slow, deliberate, and logical. This is the part of you that reflects, analyzes, compares, and reasons. It's the version of yourself you believe is in control, but it's not. The other system is fast, automatic, emotional, and instinctive. It doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't ask for logic. It acts first, and then convinces you that you chose it. This is what most people never realize. The majority of your decisions are made before you're even aware of them. Your conscious mind, the voice you call me, is often just explaining actions after they've already happened. It's like a narrator arriving late to a story, trying to create meaning out of something it didn't control. Imagine driving home after a long day. You don't remember every turn. You don't recall every signal. And yet, you arrive. Safely. Automatically. That's autopilot. Efficient. Fast. Effortless. Your brain does this to conserve energy. It builds patterns so it doesn't have to think deeply every time. And this system is incredibly powerful. But here's the problem. That same autopilot doesn't just drive your car. It drives your life. It decides how you respond in arguments, how you spend your money, how you judge people, how you react to stress. And it does all of this based on patterns, past experiences, emotional memories, learned behavior, not logic, not truth. Take something simple. You walk into a store. You see something you didn't plan to buy. Your brain doesn't pause and calculate long-term value. It reacts. I want this. I deserve this. This will make me feel better. That's not thinking. That's impulse, disguised as reasoning. And then later, your mind justifies it. It wasn't that expensive. I'll use it. I needed it anyway. But the truth is, the decision was already made long before the justification began. The same pattern shows up in relationships. Someone says something small, something harmless, but it triggers you. You react instantly. You become defensive. You raise your voice. You say something you didn't fully mean. And in that moment, you believe you're responding logically. But you're not. You're reacting emotionally, based on old experiences your brain has stored and linked to similar situations. Your brain simplifies reality through mental shortcuts. It labels things quickly: safe, dangerous, good, bad. These shortcuts are useful. They help you move fast, but they're not always accurate. And over time, they begin to distort how you see the world, because your brain is not built to seek truth. It's built to save energy and ensure survival. It asks, what's the fastest way to respond? Not, what's the most accurate decision? That's why people jump to conclusions, why they misjudge others, why they repeat the same mistakes again and again, not because they're incapable of thinking, but because they rarely slow down enough to actually do it. And here's where it becomes dangerous. When something feels right, you stop questioning it. You trust the feeling. You assume clarity. But that feeling is often just familiarity, your brain recognizing a pattern it has seen before, not verifying whether it's correct. You've experienced this, that quiet confidence in a decision, that sense of certainty. And then later, regret, confusion, doubt, because what felt right was never fully examined. The mind is incredibly persuasive. It can take a reaction and present it as logic. It can take an impulse and disguise it as intention. And unless you learn to notice the difference, you will continue to live on autopilot, repeating patterns that feel natural but lead you in the wrong direction. So how do you break this? Not with control, not with perfection, but with awareness. The next time you feel the urge to act quickly, pause, just for a moment, and ask yourself one simple question. Is this a reaction or a decision? That question interrupts the pattern. It creates space between impulse and action. And in that space, real thinking begins. Because thinking is not automatic. It requires effort, attention, presence. It requires you to slow down in a world that constantly pushes you to move faster. But this is where clarity lives. Not in speed, not in emotion, but in awareness. Because once you realize that your thoughts are not always yours, that your reactions are not always correct, you gain something most people never truly have: choice. Not the illusion of choice, but real choice. The ability to step outside the pattern and decide differently. And that is where control begins. Not control over everything, but control over yourself. Because the moment you stop reacting is the moment you finally begin to think. Chapter 2. Your brain is built to be wrong. Your brain is not designed to be right. It's designed to keep you alive. And those two goals are not the same. This is one of the most important truths you can understand about your mind, because once you see it, you begin to question everything you once trusted. Long before modern life existed, before careers, money, social media, or complex decisions, your brain had a single purpose: survival. Avoid danger, find safety, stay alive at all costs. That was it. And to do that effectively, your brain had to move fast. There was no time for deep thinking, no time for careful analysis. If something moved in the bushes, you didn't stop to consider what it might be. You reacted. You ran. Because in that world, hesitation could mean death. So, your brain evolved to prioritize speed over accuracy. It became wired to make quick decisions, even if those decisions weren't perfect. Because being wrong and safe was always better than being right and dead. And that ancient system, the one built for survival, is still inside you today. It hasn't changed, but the world around you has. Today, you're not running from predators. You're making decisions about your future, your career, your relationships, your finances, your goals. These decisions require logic, patience, and long-term thinking. But your brain still operates as if danger is everywhere. It still reacts quickly. It still prioritizes safety. And that's where the problem begins. Because your brain doesn't understand the difference between real danger and perceived discomfort. This is why fear feels so powerful. Because in your brain, fear is not just an emotion. It's a signal, a command. When fear appears, your body reacts instantly. Your heart rate increases, your breathing changes, your muscles tense, and in that moment your ability to think clearly decreases. Logic steps back and instinct takes over. You are no longer analyzing, you are reacting. And this doesn't just happen in life-threatening situations, it happens in everyday life. Think about moments of uncertainty, a new opportunity, a difficult decision, a situation where the outcome isn't guaranteed. Your mind immediately begins to generate what-if scenarios. What if this goes wrong? What if you fail? What if you lose something important? And suddenly, the safest option feels like the smartest one. But it's not logic guiding you. It's fear. Fear narrows your thinking. It reduces your ability to see possibilities. It pushes you toward immediate safety, even if that safety costs you long-term growth. This is why people stay in situations that no longer serve them. Jobs they don't enjoy, relationships that don't fulfill them, patterns that limit them, not because they don't know better, but because leaving feels uncertain. And uncertainty feels like danger. Your brain interprets unfamiliar situations as threats, even when they're not. It would rather keep you in a predictable environment, even if it's uncomfortable, than risk the unknown. Because from a survival perspective, the unknown has always been dangerous. But here's the reality of modern life. Growth requires uncertainty. Every meaningful change in your life will involve stepping into something unfamiliar, and that unfamiliarity will trigger fear. Not because it's dangerous, but because your brain hasn't experienced it before. This is where most people get stuck. They trust the feeling. They assume that because something feels uncomfortable, it must be wrong. That resistance must be a warning. That fear must be telling them to stop. But what if it's not? What if that feeling is simply your brain trying to protect you from something it doesn't understand? Think about public speaking. For many people, it feels terrifying. Their heart races. Their hands sweat. Their thoughts become scattered. But there is no real danger, no predator, no threat to survival. And yet, the reaction is intense. Why? Because your brain interprets judgment as a form of risk. In ancient times, being rejected by a group could lead to isolation, and isolation could mean death. So your brain learned to avoid situations where you might be judged or rejected. But today, that same reaction shows up in situations where the stakes are completely different. This is the distortion. Your brain treats discomfort as if it were danger. It exaggerates risk. It amplifies fear. And it pushes you toward safety, even when safety is not what you need. Now here's where it becomes even more subtle. Your brain doesn't just react to fear, it explains it. It creates thoughts that feel logical. It's not the right time. I'm not ready yet. This could go wrong. I should wait. These thoughts feel reasonable. They feel intelligent. But underneath they are driven by fear, not by clarity. Fear disguises itself as logic. And unless you recognize that, you will believe it. You will delay action. You will avoid opportunities. You will stay in situations that feel safe but limit your growth. And over time, this becomes your life. Predictable, controlled, comfortable, but also restricted. Because your brain chose survival over truth. It chose safety over possibility. But here's the shift you need to make. Just because something feels dangerous doesn't mean it is. And just because something feels safe doesn't mean it's right. Feelings are not facts. They are signals. And sometimes those signals are outdated. So instead of automatically trusting them, you begin to question them. The next time you feel resistance, pause. Ask yourself, is this actually dangerous or just unfamiliar? That question is powerful because it interrupts the automatic response. It forces your brain to reconsider. It creates a moment of awareness where you can separate feeling from reality. Because unfamiliar things always trigger fear. Not because they're harmful, but because your brain hasn't adapted to them yet. Growth feels uncomfortable. Change feels uncertain. Progress feels risky. But that discomfort is not a warning sign. It's a doorway. And the people who move forward, the ones who grow, who build, who change their lives, are not fearless. They simply understand fear. They recognize that their brain is trying to protect them, not guide them. They feel the fear, but they don't let it decide. They act anyway. Not blindly, not recklessly, but consciously. Because once you understand how your brain works, you stop blindly obeying it. You start observing it. You notice the fear, but you question it. You feel the discomfort, but you don't assume it means stop. And in that moment, something shifts. You move from reaction to awareness, from instinct to intention. And that's where true intelligence begins, not in knowing more, but in understanding how your own mind operates. Because your brain was built to keep you alive, but your life is built by the decisions you make beyond survival. And the moment you stop choosing safety over truth is the moment you begin choosing growth. Chapter 3. Cognitive Biases. You don't see the world as it truly is. You see it as your mind allows it. Filtered, edited, simplified, and often distorted. And the most dangerous part is not the distortion itself, but the fact that you trust it. Every day you make decisions believing you are thinking logically. You assume you are analyzing facts, weighing options, and coming to reasonable conclusions. But beneath the surface, something else is happening. Your mind is quietly bending reality, subtly, automatically, and predictably. These distortions are known as cognitive biases. They are built into the way your brain works. They are not flaws in the traditional sense. They are shortcuts, mental tools designed to help you think faster, decide quicker, and conserve energy. In a world where your brain once needed to react instantly to survive, these shortcuts were useful. But in today's world, where decisions are more complex and long-term, these same shortcuts often lead you in the wrong direction. One of the most powerful biases is confirmation bias. It works quietly, but its influence is enormous. Once you believe something about yourself, about others, about the world, your mind begins to protect that belief. It searches for information that supports it and filters out anything that contradicts it. You don't consciously decide to ignore opposing views. It just happens. You read articles that agree with you. You listen to people who validate your thinking. You notice examples that confirm your assumptions. And slowly your belief feels stronger, more certain, more real. But what's actually happening is not discovery. It's reinforcement. You are not finding the truth. You are constructing a version of reality that matches what you already believe. And because you don't see the information you're ignoring, you assume your perspective is complete. This is how people stay stuck in bad decisions, unhealthy patterns, and limited thinking, not because they lack information, but because they reject the information that challenges them. Another powerful bias is overconfidence. It feels like strength. It feels like clarity, but often it's an illusion. People consistently overestimate how much they know, how skilled they are, and how accurately they can predict outcomes. When something goes right, they attribute it to their ability. When something goes wrong, they blame external factors, timing, luck, circumstances. This creates a distorted sense of control. You begin to believe you are better than you are, more certain than you should be, and that leads to bigger risks, faster decisions, and greater mistakes. Overconfidence doesn't feel like a problem. It feels like certainty, and that's exactly why it's dangerous. Then there is availability bias. Your brain tends to believe what it can recall easily, not what is most accurate, not what is most likely, but what is most vivid and recent. If you constantly hear about negative events, failures, accidents, crises, those events begin to feel common. They feel more likely than they actually are. Your perception of reality becomes shaped by what is most visible, not what is most true. This is especially powerful in today's world. News, social media, and content platforms are designed to capture attention. And what captures attention most effectively? Emotion, fear, shock, drama. You are constantly exposed to extreme examples, rare events, and intense outcomes. And your brain absorbs it. It repeats it. It starts to believe it represents reality. As a result, your decisions become influenced by distorted perceptions. You become more cautious than necessary, or more reactive than rational. You act based on what feels real rather than what is real. Now consider how these biases interact with each other. They don't operate in isolation. They form a system. You believe something. Confirmation bias reinforces it. Overconfidence strengthens your trust in it. Availability bias makes supporting examples easier to recall. And together they create a loop that feels logical, a loop that feels justified, but a loop that is often disconnected from reality. Over time, this loop becomes your worldview, not because it is accurate, but because it is consistent. And the more consistent it feels, the harder it becomes to question. You stop asking whether your thinking is correct, and you start assuming that it is. This is where growth becomes difficult, because growth requires uncertainty. It requires you to admit that you might be wrong. It requires you to challenge your own thinking, and your brain resists that strongly. It prefers certainty, even if that certainty is false. But here is the shift that changes everything. Instead of asking yourself, "Am I right?" start asking, "What am I missing?" That single question disrupts the pattern. It opens your thinking. It forces your mind to look beyond its automatic filters. It introduces doubt, not as weakness, but as awareness. Because the goal is not to eliminate bias. That's impossible. Your brain will always use shortcuts. It will always simplify reality. But you can learn to recognize when it's happening. You can pause before accepting your first conclusion. You can question your assumptions. You can seek perspectives that challenge your beliefs instead of reinforcing them. And when you do that, something powerful happens. Your thinking becomes more flexible, more accurate, more grounded in reality. You stop reacting automatically, and you start observing consciously. Because once you see your biases, they lose their invisible power. They don't disappear, but they become visible. And what becomes visible can be questioned. And what is questioned can be changed. This is the difference between thinking and believing. Believing is automatic. Thinking is intentional. And most people never move beyond belief. They trust their first thought, their first reaction, their first conclusion. But real clarity begins when you step back and ask, is this actually true, or just something my mind is telling me? That moment, small, simple, often uncomfortable, is where your thinking begins to evolve. Because the greatest errors in your life are not always obvious. They are subtle, quiet, hidden inside the way you interpret the world, and the moment you learn to see them is the moment you finally begin to think clearly. Chapter 4: Emotions versus Logic. You believe you make decisions with logic. You believe you think things through carefully, analyze situations, and act based on reason. But in the moments that matter most, logic is not in control. Emotion is. And it happens faster than you realize. So fast that by the time you think you're deciding, the decision has already been made. Before a thought fully forms, before logic has time to evaluate, your emotions have already responded. They have already chosen a direction. And then your mind steps in, not to decide, but to justify. You don't choose first and feel later. You feel first, and then convince yourself that your choice makes sense. This is the hidden order of decision-making. Emotion first, logic second. Let's start with fear. Fear is immediate. It doesn't wait. It doesn't negotiate. It appears suddenly and takes control. When fear shows up, your brain doesn't pause to gather evidence or consider long-term consequences. It reacts. Your body shifts into survival mode. Your thoughts narrow. Your focus becomes limited. And in that moment, your priority is not truth. It is safety. Think about a situation where you faced uncertainty, a new opportunity, a difficult decision, something that could change your life. What happened? Your mind likely filled with questions. What if this goes wrong? What if I fail? What if I lose something important? And suddenly, the safest option began to feel like the smartest one. But that wasn't logic guiding you. It was fear. Fear has a powerful effect. It shrinks your perspective. It reduces your ability to see possibilities. It pushes you toward immediate comfort, even if that comfort leads to long-term regret. This is why people stay in situations that no longer serve them, not because they lack intelligence or awareness, but because fear feels like a warning signal. But often it's not a warning. It's resistance. Now consider the opposite force, desire, or what we often call greed. If fear pulls you backward, desire pushes you forward. It creates excitement, urgency, and a sense of opportunity. It tells you, this is your chance. Don't miss this. Act now. And just like fear, it feels convincing. It feels real. In moments of excitement, your mind speeds up. Your heart rate increases. You feel driven to act quickly. But in that state, you are not evaluating risk. You are chasing reward. You become overconfident. You ignore potential downsides. You assume the outcome will go your way. Again, this is not logic. It is emotion. And just like fear, it can lead you in the wrong direction. Now let's look at anxiety. Unlike fear, which is sharp and immediate, anxiety is quiet and persistent. It lingers in the background. It doesn't demand action. It prevents it. It fills your mind with doubt, with what-if scenarios, with endless possibilities that keep you stuck. You replay decisions. You question yourself. You hesitate. And eventually, you do nothing. Not because you don't know what to do, but because your emotions have overwhelmed your clarity. Anxiety creates the illusion that more thinking will solve the problem, when in reality, it's the thinking itself that is keeping you trapped. Now bring all of this together with stress. Stress amplifies everything. It combines fear, pressure, and uncertainty into a single experience. And when stress rises, your ability to think clearly decreases. Your focus narrows. Your patience disappears. You become reactive. This is why people make their worst decisions under pressure. They say things they don't mean. They take actions they later regret. They abandon long-term goals for short-term relief. Because in that moment, they are not thinking. They are escaping. And here's the most dangerous part. They believe they are still in control, but they're not. Their emotions are. This is why two people can face the exact same situation and make completely different decisions. Not because one is smarter, but because they feel differently. And those feelings shape their thinking. So what does this mean for you? It means you cannot trust every thought you have, because not every thought comes from logic. Some come from fear, some come from desire, some come from past experiences that no longer apply. And if you don't recognize that, you will continue to be guided by emotions that feel real, but are not always accurate. But here's the shift. You don't need to eliminate emotion. That's impossible. Emotion is part of being human. It provides signals, energy, and awareness. The goal is not to remove it, but to separate it from action. The next time you feel a strong emotion, pause. Not to suppress it, not to ignore it, but to observe it. Ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? Not, what should I do? Because understanding the emotion must come before making the decision. If you're afraid, acknowledge it. If you're excited, recognize it. If you're anxious, notice it. But don't let it decide. That pause creates space. And in that space, something important happens. Logic has time to appear. Because logic is quiet, it doesn't rush, it doesn't demand, it doesn't force action. It waits. But emotion doesn't wait. Emotion demands immediate response. And if you don't create that space, emotion will always win. Every time. So your power is not in controlling what you feel. It is in controlling what you do next. You don't choose your emotions. They arrive on their own. But you do choose your response. And that choice, that small moment between feeling and action, is where your power begins. Because the more you practice this, the more you strengthen your awareness. You begin to recognize emotional patterns. You begin to see when fear is influencing you, when desire is rushing you, when anxiety is holding you back. And slowly, your decisions change. Not because your emotions disappear, but because they no longer control you. You begin to act with intention. You begin to think with clarity. You begin to respond instead of react. And over time, that becomes your default. Because in the end, it's not the emotions you feel that shape your life. It's the actions you take after feeling them. And the moment you learn to separate the two is the moment you take control of your mind. Chapter 5. The loop of bad decisions. You've been here before. The same situation, the same choice, the same outcome. Different day, different details, but somehow it feels familiar. You tell yourself, this time will be different. And for a moment, you believe it. But then you fall back into the same pattern, the same reaction, the same decision, the same regret. And afterward, you ask yourself the same question. Why do I keep doing this? The answer is not a lack of knowledge. You already know better. You've learned the lesson. You've experienced the consequences. And yet, you repeat it. Because your life is not driven by decisions alone. It's driven by patterns. Every behavior you repeat follows a simple structure, a trigger, an action, and a reward. It starts with a feeling or situation, a moment of discomfort, stress, or boredom. That's the trigger. Then comes the action, the habit your brain has learned to rely on. And finally, the reward, relief, comfort, or escape. Even if the outcome is negative in the long term, the short-term reward keeps the loop alive. Your brain doesn't measure long-term consequences. It measures immediate relief. And once it finds a pattern that works, it locks it in. This is why people stay stuck in habits they want to break. You feel stressed, so you distract yourself. You feel uncomfortable, so you avoid action. You feel pressure, so you delay. And in the moment, it works. You feel better. But later, the problem returns, often stronger, and the loop continues. Not because you lack discipline, but because your brain has learned that this pattern provides relief. Now here's where it gets deeper. Comfort is not just a place. It's a pattern. It's a set of behaviors your brain recognizes as safe, familiar, and predictable. Even if it's not making you happy, you can feel stuck and still feel comfortable, because your brain values familiarity more than improvement. This is why people stay in jobs they don't enjoy, habits they want to change, and lives they secretly want to escape. Not because they can't leave, but because leaving feels uncertain. And uncertainty feels dangerous. This is also where self-sabotage begins. It doesn't look obvious. It doesn't feel intentional. But it happens quietly. You get close to progress, close to change, close to something better, and then you hesitate. You delay. You overthink. You make a small decision that pulls you back. And suddenly you're back where you started. This isn't laziness. It isn't weakness. It's protection. Your brain trying to keep you within the boundaries it understands. Because growth is unfamiliar. And unfamiliar feels unsafe. So your mind creates resistance. It gives you thoughts like, I'm not ready, I need more time, or I'll start tomorrow. These thoughts feel harmless, but they are not neutral. They are barriers. Barriers designed to keep you inside the loop. And here's the most important part. Awareness alone is not enough. You can recognize the pattern. You can understand the behavior. You can even predict the outcome. And still, repeat it. Because knowing something and changing something are not the same. Change requires interruption. You have to break the loop. And breaking the loop feels uncomfortable because it removes the reward. When you stop the habit, you also remove the relief it provides. And your brain doesn't like that. It pushes back. It creates urges. It increases discomfort. It tries to pull you back into the pattern. This is why change feels difficult, not because it's impossible, but because it disrupts the system your brain has built. So what do? You don't fight the loop directly. You replace it. Same trigger, different action. When stress appears, instead of escaping, you face it. When discomfort rises, instead of avoiding, you act. The reward changes, not immediate comfort, but long-term clarity. And over time, your brain adapts. New pattern, new loop, new outcome. But this requires consistency, not motivation. Motivation fades, patterns stay. So you build systems, small actions repeated daily, not dramatic change, but steady interruption. Because every time you choose differently, you weaken the old loop and strengthen the new one, slowly, quietly, until one day the pattern shifts, and what once felt difficult becomes natural. Because your life is not shaped by what you know, it's shaped by what you repeat, and the moment you break the loop is the moment your life begins to change. Chapter 6. Social Programming. You believe your thoughts are your own. Your opinions, your beliefs, your decisions, all of it feels personal, chosen, and intentional. But if you look closely, you'll begin to notice something unsettling. Much of what you think was never truly chosen by you. It was absorbed, quietly, gradually, without your awareness. From the moment you were born, you were placed into an environment, a family, a culture, a system of beliefs. And before you had the ability to question anything, you were already learning. Not through logic, but through observation. You watched how people spoke, how they reacted, what they believed, and how they lived. And slowly, without realizing it, you adopted those patterns. This is where your programming begins. Your beliefs about money, what is possible, what is risky, what is realistic. Your beliefs about success, what it looks like, who deserves it, whether it's even meant for you. Your beliefs about yourself, your value, your limits, your identity. None of these were created in isolation. They were shaped, repeated, reinforced, and normalized until they felt like truth. But familiarity is not the same as truth. It just feels like it. As you grew older, another layer of influence was added: society. Not in an obvious way, but in a constant, subtle stream. Through media, education, social platforms, and the people around you, you were shown what matters, what success looks like, what you should want, and how you should think. And without realizing it, you began to compare. Am I ahead? Am I behind? Am I doing enough? Your standards began to shift, not based on your own goals, but based on what you saw around you. This is social conditioning. You don't just observe your environment, you adapt to it. You adjust your expectations, your desires, and even your identity based on what is presented to you. Now consider how often you scroll through your phone. You see curated lives, highlighted moments, carefully constructed images of success, happiness, and achievement. And even if you know it's not the full picture, your brain still absorbs it. It still compares, it still measures, and slowly your thinking begins to change. Not because you chose it, but because you were exposed to it. This is where herd mentality comes in, the tendency to follow others, not because it's logical, but because it feels safe. When many people believe something, it starts to feel true. When many people do something, it starts to feel right, even if it isn't. Think about trends, opinions, and decisions. People often follow what others are doing, not because they've deeply analyzed the situation, but because they trust the group. There's comfort in numbers, a sense of safety in agreement. If everyone is doing it, it must be correct. But history has shown again and again that crowds can be wrong, massively wrong, and yet people follow anyway, because standing alone feels uncomfortable. This brings us to something deeper: social validation, the need to be accepted, approved, understood. Your brain is wired for it. In ancient times, being part of a group meant survival. Being rejected meant isolation, and isolation meant danger. So your brain learned to adapt, to fit in, to align with others, to avoid standing out too much. That instinct still exists today. It shows up in subtle ways. You hesitate to express a different opinion. You adjust your behavior depending on who you're around. You hold back your true thoughts to avoid judgment, not because you're weak, but because your brain is trying to protect you. But that protection comes with a cost. You begin to lose clarity. Your decisions become influenced by others. Your thinking becomes filtered, not by truth but by acceptance. Over time, you stop asking, "What do I actually believe?" and start asking, "What will others think?" And without realizing it, your identity begins to blur. You become a reflection of your environment, a product of influence, not intention. And the most dangerous part? It feels normal, because everyone around you is doing the same thing. But here's where the shift begins: awareness. The moment you start noticing influence, you begin to separate from it. You begin to question your thoughts instead of accepting them automatically. You start asking, is this truly my belief or something I've been taught to believe? That question is powerful because it breaks the pattern. It interrupts the automatic process of absorbing and repeating. You begin to see how media shapes perception, how environments shape behavior, and how people shape thinking. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Now, this doesn't mean you reject everything around you. It means you become selective. You choose your influences. You choose your environment. You choose what you allow into your mind. Because what you surround yourself with will shape how you think. If you're constantly exposed to negativity, your thinking becomes negative. If you're surrounded by limitation, your thinking becomes limited. If you're influenced by growth, your thinking expands. This is not motivation. This is programming. And the goal is not to eliminate influence, because that's impossible. The goal is to control it, because influence is inevitable. But direction is a choice. And once you realize that your thoughts are not always your own, you gain the ability to choose which ones become yours. And that is where true independence begins. Chapter 7. The Danger of Overthinking. You've been told your whole life to think before you act. It sounds wise, responsible, even intelligent. And to a certain point, it is. But there's a side of thinking that no one warns you about. You can think too much. And when you do, thinking stops helping and starts trapping you. At first, it feels productive. You analyze the situation. You consider different options. You imagine possible outcomes. You tell yourself, I just need a little more clarity, so you keep going. More thoughts, more scenarios, more possibilities. But slowly, something changes. Your thinking begins to slow you down. You hesitate. You question yourself. You replay the same ideas again and again, and suddenly, you're stuck. This is analysis paralysis, the point where thinking replaces action. You don't move forward. You don't decide. You remain in a loop, not because you lack intelligence or ability, but because you're searching for certainty, and certainty doesn't exist. You want the perfect decision, the perfect timing, the perfect outcome. But perfection is a trap, because the more you search for it, the further you move from action. And without action, nothing changes. Now here's the deeper truth. Overthinking is not about logic. It's about fear. Fear of making the wrong decision, fear of failure, fear of regret, fear of the unknown. So your mind tries to protect you. It creates more scenarios. It slows you down. It tells you, think it through one more time. But it's not helping. It's delaying. Because as long as you're thinking, you don't have to act. And as long as you don't act, you don't have to face the outcome. Overthinking is not clarity. It's avoidance. It gives you the illusion of control while keeping you exactly where you are. Over time, this creates mental exhaustion. Your mind becomes crowded. Too many thoughts, too many possibilities, too many what-ifs. Instead of gaining clarity, you lose it. Your focus fades. Your confidence drops. Decisions feel heavier, harder, more overwhelming. And the more overwhelmed you feel, the more you think. And the more you think, the more stuck you become. It's a loop, a quiet, exhausting loop that keeps you in place. But here's what most people never realize. Clarity doesn't come from thinking. It comes from action. You don't figure everything out first and then act. You act. And then you figure it out. Every step forward gives you new information. Every decision teaches you something. Every action creates clarity. But if you stay in your head, you never experience that. You stay in theory, not reality. Think about how many times you delayed something, only to realize later it wasn't as complicated as you thought. The problem was never the situation. It was the thinking around it. So the shift is simple. Instead of asking, what's the perfect decision? Ask, what's the next step? Not the final answer, not the complete solution, just the next move. Because progress is built step by step. Each step reduces uncertainty. Each step builds confidence. Each step weakens the habit of overthinking. Now imagine what happens when you stop waiting. You take small actions. You move forward consistently. Your mind becomes quieter. Your clarity increases. Your confidence grows. Not because you thought more, but because you did more. Because action breaks the loop. Perfection keeps you stuck. Action moves you forward. And in the end, it's not the decisions you overanalyze that shape your life. It's the ones you had the courage to act on. Chapter 8. False Reality. You trust what you see, what you hear, what you feel. It seems obvious. Reality is right in front of you, clear, direct, undeniable. But what if it isn't? What if the world you experience is not reality itself, but a version of it, filtered through your mind? Because the truth is simple. You don't see reality. You see your interpretation of reality. Your brain does not process everything equally. It filters information. It selects what to focus on. It ignores what it considers unnecessary. Out of millions of details around you, you notice only a small fraction. And even that fraction is shaped by your past, your beliefs, and your expectations. This is perception, not reality. Two people can experience the exact same situation and walk away with completely different conclusions. One sees opportunity, the other sees risk. One feels comfortable, the other feels uneasy. What changed? Not the situation, the interpretation. Your mind acts like a lens. Everything you experience passes through it, and that lens is shaped by your life, your upbringing, your experiences, your successes, your failures. If you've been hurt before, you may see danger where none exists. If you've been rejected, you may expect rejection, even when it's not there. If you've failed in the past, you may assume failure before even trying. These are not facts. They are filters, and once they're in place, they begin to shape everything you see. Imagine someone gives you feedback, neutral, constructive, but if your filter is insecurity, you hear criticism. If your filter is confidence, you hear opportunity. Same words, different reality. This is why misunderstandings happen, why people interpret situations differently, why conflict exists even when intentions are clear. Because no one is seeing the full picture. Everyone is seeing their version of it. Now consider the role of your past. Your past does not stay behind you. It travels with you into every decision, every relationship, every moment. Your brain stores experiences and uses them to predict the future. It creates patterns. It builds expectations. So when something new happens, your brain doesn't just respond to the present. It responds to the past. It overlays old experiences onto new situations, and that becomes your reality. But here's where it becomes dangerous. You begin to believe that your perception is the truth, not a version of it, not an interpretation, but reality itself. And once you believe that, you stop questioning it. You trust your thoughts. You trust your judgments. You trust your conclusions, even when they are incomplete, even when they are wrong. This is how false reality forms. A consistent, believable version of the world that feels real, but isn't entirely accurate. And the longer you live in it, the harder it becomes to see beyond it, because everything you notice reinforces it. You see what confirms your beliefs. You ignore what challenges them. You interpret events in ways that match your expectations. And over time, your version of reality becomes stronger, not because it's true, but because it's repeated. So what's the solution? You don't try to eliminate your perception. You question it. The next time you react to something, pause. Ask yourself, is this what actually happened, or how I'm interpreting it? That question creates distance. It separates reality from perception, and in that space, clarity begins. You start to see alternative explanations, different perspectives, new possibilities. You realize that your first reaction is not always the full picture, and that realization changes everything, because it gives you flexibility. Instead of being trapped in one way of seeing things, you open yourself to others. You become less reactive, more aware, less certain, but more accurate, because your reality is not fixed. It is shaped, edited, filtered. And the moment you begin to see that is the moment you finally start seeing clearly. Chapter 9. Breaking the pattern. Up to this point, you've seen it. The patterns, the reactions, the invisible forces shaping your decisions. You've realized something uncomfortable, that your thinking is not as clear or as controlled as you once believed. But awareness alone does not change your life. You can understand your habits, recognize your biases, and still repeat the same behaviors. Because insight without action changes nothing. So now the real question begins. How do you break the pattern? How do you move from automatic thinking to conscious thinking? It starts with something simple but powerful. Awareness, not passive awareness, not just noticing after the fact. Active awareness, the ability to catch your thoughts as they happen. Most people live inside their thoughts. They don't observe them. They become them. A thought appears, and they follow it instantly. No pause, no question, no distance. But to break the pattern, you need to step outside of that. You need to see your thoughts not as truth, but as signals. The next time a thought appears, pause. Don't react immediately. Don't follow it blindly. Just notice it. This is a thought. That small shift creates space, and in that space, something changes. You are no longer controlled. You are observing, and observation is the beginning of control. Now comes the next step. Questioning. Your mind presents thoughts as facts. It makes them feel certain, obvious, real, but they are not always true. Many of them are assumptions, interpretations, or emotional reactions. So instead of accepting them, challenge them. Ask yourself, is this actually true? What evidence do I have? What am I assuming? What might I be missing? These questions slow your thinking. They interrupt the automatic process. They force your mind to step out of reaction and into analysis. Because when you question your thoughts, you weaken their authority. Now let's talk about speed. Most bad decisions happen too quickly. Emotion rises and action follows. There is no pause, no reflection, just reaction. So one of the simplest ways to think better is to slow down. Not in everything, but in the moments that matter. When something feels urgent, pause. When something feels emotional, wait. When something feels obviously right, question it. Because urgency is often not clarity. It is emotion. Slowing down gives your mind time to process, to evaluate, to separate feeling from fact. And that's where better decisions are made, not in speed, but in stillness. Now comes something most people overlook: consistency. You can pause once, you can question once. But patterns are not broken in a single moment. They are broken through repetition. This is where discipline comes in, not force, not control, but consistency. Small actions, repeated daily. You begin to build habits of awareness. You reflect, you observe, you adjust. For example, at the end of your day, take a moment and ask yourself, what decisions did I make today? Which ones were automatic? Which ones were intentional? Not to judge yourself, not to criticize, but to understand. Because understanding builds awareness, and awareness builds change. Another powerful tool is writing. When your thoughts stay in your mind, they feel real, they feel convincing. But when you put them on paper, something changes. You see them clearly. You notice patterns. You recognize distortions. Writing separates emotion from logic. It gives you distance, and distance gives you clarity. Now consider your environment. Your thinking is not independent of what surrounds you, what you consume, what you watch, who you listen to. All of it shapes your thoughts. If your environment is noisy, your thinking becomes scattered. If your environment is reactive, your thinking becomes reactive. So you begin to control your inputs. Less distraction, less noise, more clarity, because a clear mind requires a clear environment. And then there's something even more important: rest. A tired mind does not think clearly. It reacts faster. It assumes more. It questions less. When you are overwhelmed, distracted, or exhausted, your ability to think decreases. So if you want clarity, you need stillness. Moments without input, moments without distraction, because in silence, your mind resets. Now bring all of this together: awareness, questioning, slowing down, consistency, environment, rest. These are not complex strategies, they are simple shifts. But when applied consistently, they transform how you think. You move from reaction to intention, from automatic to aware. And over time, that becomes your default. You stop reacting instantly. You start thinking clearly. You make decisions that are aligned with reality, not just emotion. Because breaking the pattern is not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming conscious. And the moment you begin to see your thoughts instead of blindly following them is the moment your mind stops controlling you, and you finally begin to control it. Chapter 10. Reprogram your mind. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your patterns. That means no matter how ambitious your plans are, no matter how clear your vision feels, your daily habits will always determine your outcome. And if those habits are automatic, reactive, and unexamined, your life becomes predictable. Not because you lack potential, but because your mind is running on old programming. The same thoughts, the same reactions, the same decisions, again and again. So if you want a different life, you don't just change what you do occasionally, you change the system behind what you do consistently. Because your mind is not fixed, it is trained. And right now, it has been trained by default, by your past, your environment, your repeated behaviors. But here's the shift. You can retrain it. You can build a new thinking system, not instantly, not perfectly, but intentionally. And it begins with one principle: replace, don't remove. Most people try to stop bad habits by force. They say, I won't overthink, I won't react emotionally, I won't procrastinate. But the mind doesn't work like that. You cannot simply remove a pattern and leave empty space. The brain fills gaps. If you remove a behavior without replacing it, the old one returns. So instead of trying to stop a pattern, you replace it. Instead of reacting immediately, you pause. Instead of overthinking endlessly, you act on one small step. Instead of avoiding discomfort, you face it deliberately. This is how reprogramming begins, not by fighting your mind, but by guiding it. Now let's build the system. First, awareness. You don't need to monitor every thought. That's impossible. But you need to notice patterns, moments when you react automatically, moments when emotion takes over, moments when you fall into old habits. Not to judge yourself, but to recognize what's happening. Because what you don't see, you can't change. Second, externalize your thinking. When your thoughts stay inside your head, they feel powerful, convincing, real. But when you put them into words, on paper or anywhere outside your mind, you gain distance. You begin to see patterns. You notice repeated beliefs. You catch hidden assumptions. You separate emotion from logic. Writing is not just recording thoughts. It is revealing them. Third, reflection. At the end of your day, take a moment to look back. What did I do well? Where did I react automatically? What will I do differently next time? Not as criticism, but as adjustment. Because improvement is not about being perfect. It's about being aware and correcting. Fourth, environment. This is where most people fail. They try to change their thinking while staying in the same environment that created their current patterns. But your environment constantly feeds your mind. What you watch, what you read, who you listen to, all of it becomes input, and your brain uses that input to shape your thoughts. If your environment is filled with noise, your thinking becomes scattered. If your environment is negative, your thinking becomes limited. So you become selective. You reduce distractions. You choose better inputs. You surround yourself with clarity, because your mind reflects what it consumes. Now let's talk about repetition. Reprogramming is not a one-time decision. It is repetition. The same small actions done consistently. Pause. Question. Act intentionally. Again and again. At first, it feels unnatural, because you are interrupting patterns your brain has relied on for years. But over time, something changes. The new pattern becomes easier, then automatic, and eventually it becomes your default. Because your brain doesn't care what is right. It cares what is repeated. Whatever you do most often becomes who you are. If you react often, you become reactive. If you pause often, you become aware. If you act intentionally, you become disciplined. Your identity is not fixed. It is built through patterns, through repetition, through behavior. So if you want to change your identity, you don't focus on labels. You focus on actions. You build new patterns, and your identity follows. Now bring everything together. You notice your thoughts. You question them. You slow down your reactions. You reflect on your actions. You control your environment. You repeat new behaviors. And slowly, quietly, your mind begins to change. Your reactions become different. Your clarity improves. Your decisions become stronger. Not because you forced it, but because you trained it. Because your mind is either your greatest tool or your greatest limitation. And the difference is not intelligence, it's training. So you have a choice. You can let your mind run on old patterns shaped by the past, or you can build a new system designed for clarity, control, and growth. Because in the end, you can train your mind or be controlled by it. And that choice is not made once. It is made every single day. Conclusion. You've seen it now, the patterns, the illusions, and the hidden forces shaping your thoughts. Most people never reach this level of awareness. They move through life reacting, not thinking. They trust every thought, follow every impulse, and repeat the same patterns without ever asking why. But now, you are different. Because awareness changes everything. You begin to notice your reactions. You start questioning your thoughts. You see how often your mind tries to take control without your permission. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. This is where the shift happens. From unconscious to aware. From automatic to intentional. It won't be perfect. You will still react. You will still fall into old patterns. But now, you will catch it. And that moment of awareness is where your power begins. Because once you see the pattern, you can break it. Once you question a thought, you weaken it. Once you pause, you take back control. Your life is not shaped by what happens to you. It's shaped by how you think about what happens. Every decision, every reaction, every choice begins in your mind. And now, you have the ability to change that. You can pause. You can question. You can choose differently. Not perfectly, but consciously. And that is where real transformation begins. Because the greatest change in your life will not come from changing the world around you, but from finally understanding and mastering the world within you.